Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. The waiting is over. Finally, the 2025 Automotive Cybersecurity Report of Upstream is published, so you can access it via our website. Together with me today, my colleague Matt MacKinnon will join me in the Mind the Cyber Gap webinar. Now, before we jump into it, Matt, maybe we spend a few words about who we are. So on Upstream side, if you're not familiar with us, we offer a cloud-based cybersecurity and data management platform which provides data-driven insights into the mobility risks and challenges. Now, Upstream is at the forefront of automotive cybersecurity since many, many years. And as part of our own goal to understand the market and the magnitude of the risks associated with connected mobility, we are now at the 7th edition of the annual report. On top of it, we were asked by all the stakeholders that have appreciated early on from 2019 the information that we have gathered and shared with the community to also create mid-year reports. So as you can see from the bookshelf, we started with Global Automotive Cybersecurity report, very specific to the automotive world. And you may have experienced that we have, according also to the proliferation of technology and the way that the mobility ecosystem has expanded, more and more talked about the risks related to automotive and cybersecurity in the smart mobility space. So, Matt, before we go actually into the 2025 report and our findings, maybe you can spend a little bit and let us know how do we get the data, how we gather it. By the way, an amazing team. I want to thank everyone in Upstream who is involved in creating the report. This year it's almost 160 pages, so it's more than a report, it's almost a book. So big kudos to the team who is working for months to make sure that all of you, all of the audience, all the stakeholders that really appreciate what we're putting here together can read about the latest and greatest in automotive cybersecurity. So maybe if you want to elaborate a little bit about what we do and how we do get the data that we are about to present.
Yeah, thank you very much, Giuseppe. And I have to say, you've had the good fortune to do this webinar a couple of years in a row now. This is my first year doing it with you. I'm really pleased to join you and excited about what we have to share. So for those of you that are familiar with Upstream, we have a pretty unique and pretty talented research team. We refer to them as the Auto Threat Team. What they do is really pretty special in the industry. They do classic cyber threat intelligence work, but they are also experts in the automotive and smart mobility domain. Their research and activity extends beyond just cars themselves, but into chipsets and software libraries, EV charging systems, API attacks, you name it, anything that's associated with the automotive industry. So it's this research that we do for ourselves, but also for our customers, that is the foundation for this report that's been going on for so many years. So this year, a couple of the unique facts, and we'll hit you with a bunch of stats as we go throughout this webinar, but we looked at over 400 new public incidents this year, and over 1,000 different threat actors that are both in the open source, but also in the deep and dark web. We've had our researchers engaging with these folks, researching them, investigating their work, and that is really where this report comes from. Before we go into 2025, maybe we should take a peek back at 2024, look at what some of the key takeaways were there, and that'll set the stage for going into 2025. For those of you that were with us in 2024, you'll remember that we really talked a lot about this inflection point. And the inflection point was the shift into the threats and attacks being focused at scale. You'll notice in this chart, and we'll use this chart multiple times today, we're talking about mobility assets. This is cars, but it's also EV charging systems, or other smart mobility devices, things that move, things that are connected, things associated with the industry. You'll notice that last year we pointed out that the rise in what people were focusing on that went from thousands and millions, or really became 50% of their time was focused on thousands and millions of vehicles at a time, no longer just focusing on one vehicle or one asset at a time. What that meant, though, or what they were doing then, is that about 70% of the attacks were focused on the telematics cloud, the infotainment system, the API ecosystem. So again, we're no longer going after one asset at a time, but we're going after thousands of millions of assets at a time. And to do that, the threat actors are going after things like cloud systems, software systems, API systems, and that's really the inflection point that we talked about in 2024. So without further ado, how about 2025, Giuseppe?
Thank you, Matt. I think this is spot on with what we see in terms of trends of the cyber report in 2025. And I think the analogy and taking the inflection point to understand and appreciate the reasoning that we're having here in 2025 is critical. Now, again, you mentioned at the beginning that there are 409 new incidents effectively, and you see the skew here on the graphic. So there's no surprise here. Incidents, cyber attacks have been on the rise. It's not only in our specific domain that this has been the case, but interestingly, what we are seeing is that a quarter, so roughly 108 specific attacks are geared to ransomware. So this is a new addition, a new flavor that we are seeing in the data that we are analyzing. And more importantly, if we look at who are the threat actors, you wouldn't get such a big difference compared to what was the data in the 2024 report. So roughly is a difference of 1%, perhaps. It was 64% black hat and 36 white hat. Now, this has essentially stayed the same. There is no significant deviation from what we're seeing. What is interesting, though, is what we were highlighting as the inflection point last year. Now, if we pull the same data set and compare it and add it to the data that we were analyzing last year, what is evident is not only that the incidents that are now high and massive impact have gone up. One could argue, well, that's just 10% compared to the 2023 data. However, I want you to have a closer look at the bottom of this chart. I think this is the big difference. And we were kind of predicting that this was the path, the trajectory that we would see in our industry. And it's a 4x increase when we talk about the potential to attack and have massive scale incidents. That is millions of connected assets. And I think this is the proof point that we are even beyond an inflection point, and the cyber gap is exactly addressing the gap that we are seeing, but we'll elaborate in the course of this webinar. Now, if we move forward, again, from the statistics of how the attacks have been coordinated, there is no big difference. Again, here and there, a few 2% difference compared to the data that we had last year. But looking under the hood, and again, comparing it to the data that you elaborated on with the 2023 report, boom, here you have it. So 3 major areas that we see on the telematics and cloud. You see the data in 2023 was 43%, we're now up 66%. The API, it's 13% compared to 17%. I think infotainment has gone slightly down, but again, on the charging side, we were predicting that it would go up. Now we are at 6%. So what it means is we're coming here together where in particular looking from the ransomware that we were arguing at the beginning of this webinar, is where we see the rise also in the impact. Now, maybe to have a little more of an example and deep dive into what that effectively means, let's give us a few examples, Matt.
Yeah, thank you. The stats are critical. It's important to look at the data that way, but for me, there's nothing better than an example to sort of bring it home and make it real. So for those of you that aren't familiar with Sam Curry, he and his team have been at it for years. They've done threat research against most of the major OEMs, published their work very responsibly. This guy, he even went after his mom's car when he was visiting her over Thanksgiving last year. So he's really committed to this. This particular example was back from summer of 2024, June timeframe, published it in September timeframe. In this case, they were working to compromise a specific automotive manufacturer, the API ecosystem around it, the dealer, and the app. And they went so far as to build a demonstration app to show the exploit and how it would work. So if we jump to the next slide, I can describe a little more specifically how this worked. Basically, what they were able to do was take a license plate, using APIs, figure out what the VIN number is associated with that license plate. From there, they registered themselves as a new dealer. Given the VIN and the dealer registration, now they could figure out who the owner of the vehicle was, all via APIs. They could then make themselves the owner of the vehicle. And once they could make themselves the owner of the vehicle, they could register their app as the companion app for that vehicle, which allowed them to unlock, remote start, take complete control of this vehicle. This all could be done within about 30 seconds or less. There's actually, and like I said, they did this demonstration video or app just to prove this out. And if you spend the time to go look online, there's a great video that shows this whole thing. So key thing here is, this is, fortunately, they did it responsibly. They disclosed it to the OEM. It's all been passed and fixed and was never actually exploited. But it's a terrific example of a exploit, a vulnerability that allows you to go at scale, millions of vehicles, and takes complete advantage of APIs, the telematics cloud, and all of that connectivity ecosystem that we've been talking about.
Yeah, definitely. Matt, I think it's time to disclose this graphic here, which is literally showing what we mean by mind the cyber gap. So what is it? What is the specific gap that we are alluding to? And maybe to summarize, a good way to summarize, and hopefully the examples that you have shared are helpful in that regard, is we have been talking about cybersecurity for a while now in the industry. Now, it's understandable that the first thing is, hey, there is a regulation out there. And I want the audience to realize that when we talk here about the R155, it's you can substitute it with any other regulation that is out there. We see in China a new regulation, India, etc. In the US, there's new bills presented, etc. So just take it as an equivalent of compliance, just meeting the compliance framework that is in there. Now, with the example that we have shared, interestingly, we started by looking at the vulnerabilities and the exposures and the risk of the product on the product side, so the vehicle side. Fast forward, we now see, hey, the landscape is increasing because we have now electrification. So the charging station is becoming a new attack vector, as an example. Much more sophisticated application, third parties. The ecosystem is also expanding, and the software over there is also expanding. It's not just on the product side. And interestingly, based on the example that we provided with the dealership, hey, the dealership is becoming also a very interesting point to look at from a technical perspective, because either these are owned by the OEMs or there is free dealerships who themselves are responsible for the IT, but then also handing over the application, the apps, making sure that the connectivity is established. So the ecosystem actually is expanding, and just addressing it with the framework that is out there, no matter which one it is, is really a challenge. So what we are suggesting is, and what we're seeing baked by the data that we were also showing previously, is the potential to massively attack millions of assets is really where we are concerned, and we should be concerned as an industry. Now, what does it mean? So I mentioned one thing is, let's look at the ransomware attack. It's not only affecting the bottom line, it's also affecting the business continuity, business operations, ultimately also the financials of a company if you cannot sell vehicles ultimately. Software-defined vehicles itself and the ecosystem, the surge of software everywhere to operate these very complex devices is a concern and is increasing the attack surface. That the rapid expansion of those risks, they do not go hand in hand with the regulation, because that is always something that is baked afterwards when we learn about how to address and mitigate in the long run. Now, again, the ecosystem is rather big. It's getting bigger, and we assume that the cyber gap going forward will become only higher compared to where we are today. And you see this nicely represented in the graphic. So, Matt, maybe again, the examples on the ransomware, I think it's super important to also shed some light. What does it actually mean for the ecosystem to be susceptible to those type of attacks and the disruption that's happening?
Great. So a couple more examples to help illustrate exactly what you're just describing. This particular one, I do my best to not name names and point fingers here, but back in the summer of 2024, a ransomware attack on a major provider of dealership management software. This is a significant software company used by over 15,000 different dealerships around the world. They were compromised. They were down for over 3 weeks. And it was a ransomware attack. They ended up paying over 25 million in ransom. But even more impactful than the 25 million in ransom is the dollar impact, the total economic impact of that breadth of the dealerships being compromised. There's estimates that it was on the order of $1 billion of impact, because the dealerships weren't able to sell cars. They weren't able to schedule parts or schedule service and buy and sell and do parts, manage inventory. Not to mention the reputational damage or litigation costs associated with these are major brands that we all trust, we all rely on, and to be out for multiple weeks at a time due to a ransomware attack really kind of shook the industry. And the impacts of this are still being felt today, even though it happened back in the summer. But we can move on. There's a bunch more of these things. That's a big one that many people probably heard about. Also, last year, there was the Black Basta ransomware attack. This was on a different OEM. 3 terabytes of data were stolen. This was legal documents, sales documents, HR documents, accounting, financing documents. Really critical stuff for this business was all stolen. There's another example of a Tier 2 provider who is one of the major manufacturers of HVAC and ventilation systems for vehicles. Another 2.3 terabytes of data stolen. Again, a ransomware attack or an API attack into their cloud. There's more examples. Funny enough, there are a lot of activity last summer. Last summer was bad around the world, not just in the United States. So what's the connection here? How do we tie all these things together and link this back to the cyber gap? The connection here is these examples are all around dealerships and ransomware. The role of a dealership is actually really pretty interesting and pretty keystone to the automotive industry. They've got tons of sensitive data about buyers, about sellers, about the financing involved. They handle vehicle delivery, inventory. They've got access to companion apps. We all have an app that we love that we can remote start. We can schedule service. We can check on the status of the vehicles. These are really powerful things, great business value, but all this connectivity, all this authentication and the APIs that connect all these things create a pretty broad attack surface. And so as Giuseppe has well described, the regulation that's out there is important. It's effective at parts of the automotive ecosystem. But what we're seeing is the threat actors are focusing on this broader risk landscape. They're outpacing the regulation, and organizational resilience is growing, or the need to focus on organizational resilience is much bigger than just the meeting compliance standards. All right, so if we go back to some of the research work that our auto threat team has done, and look now into what are the details that they found in the 2024 research. The key fact before we move on: nearly 4 times increase in the number of threat actors that we were tracking last year. So not only are the incidents rising, the vulnerabilities are rising, but the number of threat actors actively out there working in various ways has increased dramatically. So next, a good example of what these folks are up to is another example, again, summer of 2024, where one of the threat actors was actually offering cracked diagnostic software on a deep and dark web website. So this is a forum where they published their work. The system that they were looking to sell was allowed you to do firmware updates, custom configurations, bypass security standards on your vehicle. Really designed for fraudulent activities, to bypass the capabilities of security systems, the safety capabilities of this particular OEM. It's a good example of what is happening out there and what is available. Next example is a marketplace listing. So for those of you who don't hang out on the deep and dark web, I don't, but we certainly have colleagues who do. This is a marketplace listing. This is someone offering to sell forged documents, credentials for various automotive applications. Again, summer of 2024. The deep and dark web this is not uncommon. This is just one illustrative example of the kind of things that our team is out there finding and pointing out to our customers and our partners. So let's look at some stats again. If we look at all threat actor behavior, so not just any one group, but all threat actor behavior over 2024, we see, as we've already seen in a couple different charts, that 43% of their activity was focused on the high, sort of thousands and millions of vehicles at a time, these high and massive attacks. They've also been focused on a good balance of both targeting one stakeholder as well as multiple stakeholders. So what do I mean by that? If I'm talking about the number of assets that they're talking, the thousands to millions, we've already sort of touched on this, but you can think of it as cars, but it's really more than that, because they're going after apps on phones and the API ecosystem, EV charging systems, all kinds of the infrastructure. When we're talking about stakeholders, we're talking about, are they going after, for example, one particular automotive manufacturer, one particular brand, or are they going broad by going after, for example, a protocol that might be used in how EV charging stations communicate with the network? And so in this case, we see that the balance was pretty even between where they were focusing their time and energy. If we move on to the next piece, Black Hats in particular were really focused on scale. Not just scale in terms of the number of vehicles or number of assets they were attacking, but also scale in terms of the global reach, not just one geography, one region, but they were going after global impact. This makes sense, right? This category of bad actors, they're after money. They're after things that they can sell, things that they can use to damage, and they're going big. They're not wasting their time on small stuff. They're going big. The next piece of stats is a sort of a different kind of operator here. These are folks that are focused on fraud. So things like that example we illustrated before. These are folks that are looking for diagnostic tool hacks, or chip tuning or software tuning, or fixing mileage on your vehicle so that you can report that when you go to sell it, you report that you have less mileage than you do. So not quite the same as a black hat, but definitely not looking out for our best interest here. Again, these folks were looking at thousands of millions of assets at a time, 50% of their efforts going there. Again, pretty good balance of whether they're going after a single vendor or a broad stakeholder base at one time.
Yeah, let's get back to the cyber gap as we discussed. Maybe again, in terms of a summary, what is fueling the cyber gap? And as a reminder of what we have discussed so far, on one hand, it's the ransomware, the year of ransomware, 2024. Actually, is something that stood out. And also the expansion of the software-defined ecosystem, including the mobility assets, but also the adjacent ecosystem that is needed in order to run it. Now, we couldn't just spot the problem and not tell what is it from our perspective that is needed. Now, with the work that Upstream does with many OEMs and tier ones and other mobility stakeholders, we have seen this escalation of the cyber risks and also the serious implications that this has for safety, the brand reputation, the operational continuity, data privacy, and also in terms of the financial stability, what it means. Now, in terms of mitigating, addressing the rise, the shift of the kind of bifurcation of what is needed for compliance and what is the risk in order to address the technology-driven massive scale attacks, we are always advocating that stakeholders should really look at the ability to do things proactively. That means adopt data-driven strategy that are consistent with breaking up silos in the vSOC, that are mobility-centric, that are looking at APIs, that is leveraging cyber threat intelligence, that is incorporating vulnerability management to bridge those types of cyber gaps. And we believe that this is something that the ecosystem needs to be really focused upon. And again, the way we were describing it, and probably some of you have seen this at the recent Auto ISEC conference, where we were talking in terms of the evolution of the vSOC, which for us is the brain, the centerpiece, the way to manage, address, handle security operations for the mobility assets that are in one's perimeter. Now, we said number one, so 1.0 was back in the days where, okay, there's a regulation coming up, and the first one was indeed the UNECE with the R155, 156. So, okay, let's understand what we need to do as an industry in order to make sure that we are compliant. Then, as more and more mobility assets were added over time, there was a need for going into what we described as 2.0, meaning, hey, how can we start to build some automation into the things that we have established, into the processes and practices which will help us drive this vSOC into being this central place for the governance of mobility and cybersecurity for connected assets. Recently, we added number 3, which is, again, the ability to sift through massive amounts of data, because now we're looking also at players who have millions and millions of connected assets that they need to monitor, going back from what was, or in some cases, we still see that in the industry, a more passive approach. The meaning of it, okay, let's wait for something bad to happen, or let's try to understand if there's any exposure, any alerts that we need to address, going into a mode where this can be done more proactively. And in order to do that, generative AI capabilities are for sure something that can help in order to accelerate investigation and even do it in a proactive way. What we also said as what is the current state of the art looking at our industry is that we need to look at what is it that the mobility ecosystem, and in fact we are talking about not only specifically about the cybersecurity posture of connected assets, the entire ecosystem that is needed in order to operate, and also the idea of having autonomous connected assets operating is something that will need or will drive the need to close the cybersecurity gaps that our stakeholders are having and which we are seeing every day. So the vSOC execution in terms of a representation on a quadrant is an attempt to not only show it in a kind of a progressive mode, like saying, okay, we started with very basic concepts, and now we are also infusing more and more capabilities and technology. One way to look at it is we have introduced, and this is how we see the market, by the way, we also apply it to our customers, looking into 2 dimensions. And I'm sure everyone is familiar with the Gartner Magic Quadrant. This is kind of replicating the idea. And of course, you would want to be in the upper right-hand corner, which is the data-driven cybersecurity leaders. But what does it mean? In order to get there, and it's a road, it's a journey, it's nothing that will happen overnight. And again, when we look at how companies are able to execute on the data that they have, on one hand, on the horizontal, so the vSOC execution, on the other hand, what are the data sources that are instrumental in order to enable data-driven and informed decision? For us, it's really crucial to see that in order to address, again, the gap that we're talking about, is really imperative to do the following. The coverage of the monitoring. It needs to expand to all connected assets, including the APIs and other devices which are relevant to be operated, third parties, etc., etc. So use advanced machine learning modules, also apply models in an effective way to detect unknown threats and attacks which are not visible or even not known, and therefore can be particularly sophisticated and would need the ability to understand from a threat intelligence perspective what is it that we need to be able to address in the future, for which potentially we do not have a capability today. So things like vulnerability management, also the way to have a way to dynamically address Tara. By the way, this was also a discussion we had at one of the recent Auto Isaac, where we introduced the idea of it's really important not only to look at things like Tara in a static way, but also have the ability to connect it to the vSOC, the epicenter, the connected brain, in a way that it's dynamic. So the moment I see my risk being altered because I have a new exposure or a new incident, that needs to be reflected automatically in the way that I assess my own risk as an organization. And by the way, this has been also on many conferences a talking point. Let's talk also about the maturity and the risk appetite. So on one hand, it's, hey, these are the things that need to be done. These are the things that can be done. But then, more importantly, it's also what is the subjective risk that an organization is willing to take beyond what is mandated. And I think that's also in part addressing the cyber gap, because what is mandatory, that is objective. It's written out there. Maybe it's not prescriptive, but everyone has an idea what it means. On the other hand, in order to become a resilient player in this context, the risk appetite. So what is it that I perceive as a risk which is subjective to my mobility assets, and what are the things that I need to do in order to be protected, or at least understand what is my risk and my exposure, are the things that will help go from 1.0 to 4.0, or in other words, bring stakeholders up in this data-driven cybersecurity quadrant. So very long speech to explain extensively what we really wanted to address. Again, it's the year of the ransomware. It's vulnerabilities not only in the product, but the adjacent ecosystem. And that's why we have to be mindful in the ability and capability. So not only the how, but also the what and how we address it is really important and crucial. Matt.
Thanks, Giuseppe. I think you really drove home a couple of key points there, and the focus on not just compliance but resiliency is super important. Before we bring this webinar to a close, I think it's really important that we address one last sort of major topic, and we're sort of calling it the elephant in the room here, but that is the role of China and China in the industry. And it's been happening for a while, but it's really come to a head in the last year or two. About 10 years ago, China had a Made in China initiative that's been going on since about 2015. This was a explicit focus to reduce their dependency on international resources, but also to promote their products and technology internationally outside of China as well. They've had hundreds of billions of dollars in investment. I think it's on the order of almost $700 billion of investment that we're aware of. And it's really created a capacity that is really hard to imagine. They've really become the most motivated technology advanced competitor that this industry has seen in a long time. So a couple of numbers to make this real. Because of this focus and this innovation, they've got a 25 to 30% cost advantage for all the EVs they develop. They can get to market 50% faster. They've got 400 to 500% higher government subsidies to support this, and they control about 75% of the global battery production. The OEMs, the global OEMs, have never faced a bigger, stronger, more motivated, and more technology advanced competitor. And the impact that China is playing on this industry it just has to be acknowledged and has to be part of our plans going forward. One interesting twist to this is the regulation side of things. China has released their own version of regulation. In some regards, it's very, very similar to what's already out there. But in a couple places, they are more specific, more prescriptive in exactly the kind of testing and exactly the kind of requirements that they're specifying. So the good news is, if you're a global OEM, you have to, and you want to do business in China, you're going to have to deal with this. The good news is that it does align reasonably well with the rest of the global compliance standards, but it is something worth preparing for now. Interestingly enough, this doesn't mean that they are risk-free. There's been dozens of attacks and vulnerabilities discovered against Chinese systems and the entire Chinese automotive industry. So they are not without risk themselves either. So the international governments are certainly having a response to this. Back in September, the U.S. Department of Commerce published a recommendation that was finalized just a few weeks ago in January. This is a pretty significant escalation in the relationship here, and it effectively bans Chinese vehicles in the U.S. market based on regulation of the software, specifically the connectivity and autonomous driving software. It goes into effect software-wise in the 2027 model year and hardware-wise in the 2030 model year. So it's just getting rolled out. And at the moment, it's only addressing passenger vehicles, not commercial vehicles. But it was a very clear statement, a very strong statement by the U.S. Department of Commerce and the U.S. government about the risk here and the impact to sort of the United States economy and the United States ecosystem. This is something to watch. It's unclear exactly what the new administration will do and how it will evolve over time. But it's clear that the governments around the world are taking notice and having a response.
Yeah, let me take also a perspective, being the European located guy here, to look at what's going on in Europe, in particular, as you highlighted, also a response to the EV growth and cybersecurity. And it's interesting that the EU is mimicking, or maybe also inspired by the US actions. The officials in Europe have also echoed their concerns over potential cybersecurity, espionage, sabotage. Again, we are talking about ransomware. So it's in this realm that officials are looking more precisely at cybersecurity in the mobility space. It's not the first time. I believe there is examples where the officials in Europe have been drafting information and communication technology supply chain toolboxes, and there was a similar framework to 5G security, if I'm not mistaken. This led to several EU countries to actually ban and or limit the phase out of Chinese telco vendors. So something definitely to be having an eye on. Now, in terms of our presentation, I think we are coming to an end. Before we take a few questions, Matt, let's briefly go over what are the key takeaways. What is it that we hope we were able to convey as part of this webinar? If you want to read more, obviously, I invite you to read the 160 pages. There's much, much more compared to what we were able to share in those roughly 40-45 minutes. So again, in terms of the takeaways, it's obvious cyber risks are on the rise. They continue to be a major concern in our industry. We need to be prepared to address it. Regulation alone will not make organizations resilient. It's no longer enough, probably has never been enough in order to be ahead of what we see as evolving risks. Teams on the cyber side, they should really understand what is the exposure. Many ways, many times we see in the industry, in general, I'm talking in general, that real-time monitor is not really applied, to say the least. Sometimes it's something that is kind of baked in, but not really a real-time monitor to have the ability to immediately react to whatever is the threat that someone is facing. We talked about the importance of telematics and API. I think the numbers tell us that this is a very significant area, and I'm curious to see what the 2026 report will tell us in terms of how these numbers will evolve. And last but not least, we touched upon the short-term impact, maybe also the initiatives that we see that are related to China, and how this is the biggest auto nation in the world. Again, I think there's over 140 OEMs in China alone. So it will reshape the auto industry. It will have an impact of how we see, perceive, and how we will handle also cybersecurity. And with that, Matt, thank you for being together with me on this webinar. I think it's time for a Q&A, and let me quickly switch here my screen so I can look at the question that we received. Thank you so much for all the questions that we received. It's really a lot of questions. Trying to look at this one perhaps. Matt, so is cybersecurity in electric vehicles really a concern at this time? Or how well understood is the robustness of the security in EVs?
It's a good question. And yeah, this has been a great 45 minutes. I've really enjoyed this. In terms of EVs and cybersecurity, at the end of the day, EVs are really where a lot of advancement in software-defined vehicles is coming from. They're highly connected, full of advanced technology, autonomous driving, and managing the batteries, and so they really are complex software systems and connected to the cloud, connected to apps and APIs, and all of the things that we've been talking about as the sort of foundation for risk. So while they are not the dominant sort of in terms of volume of vehicles on the road or volume of vulnerabilities and threats we are seeing an uptick in the research around that. We're seeing in the deep and dark web, and the vulnerabilities and the attacks and the things that we think will follow. For me, this is a place that I actually have a lot of personal interest. The unique intersection of the car, the electric grid, and the user and the payment system, that the number of different connectivity points and the number of different vulnerabilities and risks there, dealing with identity and finance and payment and the electric grid, fascinating area to watch. A lot of risk, a lot of opportunity. So yes, I would say absolutely, this is something that we should be concerned about and getting ready for it before it really becomes the dominant scaling part of the industry.
Okay, great. Let's go and look at maybe another question that I see here. Is vehicle security currently seen as a problem for OEMs to solve, and how coordinated are their efforts? What opportunities for third parties to assist to share the burden in the service of customers?
So we've talked a lot about the role of the OEMs today and in the past. Obviously, the regulation is critical there and the compliance to support that regulation. But if you go beyond that, the OEMs are the ones who are doing the design, doing the testing, doing the integration of multiple components. They're the ones who are the sort of the anchors to this complex ecosystem of dealerships and distribution and finance and users and connectivity. So absolutely, they play a critical role in solving this problem. And as we've discussed for the last hour, the regulation will cover a part of it, but there's a lot more to it that needs to be looked at. With regards to coordination between OEMs, certainly within the large groups, there is a lot of coordination. Beyond that, there are industry standard organizations like the Auto ISAC, which we've been actively involved in, but which the OEMs are actively involved in, which there is a lot of sharing and coordination of information sharing because it is a shared risk and it's a shared problem in many ways. So yeah, the OEMs are working together wherever they can, but there is certain parts of it that they're just going to have to deal with on their own.
Thank you, Matt. I see a ton of other questions. Here's my suggestion. So we offer so-called VIP sessions where we can go over the slides presented with your specific teams. If you're interested, please reach out. There you can ask your specific question. We're happy to take them. Also, if you want to reach out and send us emails and question, we're happy to reply. But for now, thank you so much. Again, Matt, it has been a pleasure to be with you. Let me thank you to the audience. We hope you found it interesting, helpful, and last but not least, again, please download our report, and we're looking forward to your comments. And yeah, see you next time. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.